Well, good morning. It's Tuesday, and we're our second week into this remote learning. So we're starting in on Chapter 5 now. And Chapter 5 is on the chromosomes and inheritance. And so I've included in this module a coloring sheet that you can take a look at or complete, one for mitosis. I will later upload one for meiosis as well. I think it's kind of important that we keep those two concepts somewhat separate from each other. They look very similar to each other. They've got a lot of things in common, but they've also got some things that are significantly different. And so it helps to learn one, get one sort of seated into your memory bank and your understanding before we bridge into the other. And so I've broken this down into, this week's module will be broken into two different lectures and two different, I'll upload new activities kinds of things. So I'm working on the meiosis one. But so today we'll concentrate on mitosis, and we'll concentrate on some of the basic terminology that goes along with genetics and understanding of chromosomes and the patterns of inheritance. And it's the patterns of inheritance that are typically far more entertaining and more fun to work with than the actual process itself. However, you cannot really understand the patterns of inheritance unless you actually understand what's taking place inside each of these phases. So that's going to be our overall goal, is to get that down. And today, like I said, today we're going to work on mitosis. And so mitosis doesn't have any of these patterns of inheritance because mitosis is the ultimate way to clone a cell. And so there is no variation. And so we'll start there. Okay, I've also put in the module, I've uploaded the objectives. That's for the entire chapter, not necessarily for today, but for the entire chapter. It's the exact same objectives that were in your objective list in the manual that you purchased from the bookstore at the beginning of the semester. So nothing there has changed. I've also put in some video links. And I think that the video links are really good. They really explain mitosis quite well, along with 3D animations. So I think that stuff will be helpful for you as well. And so check those out. All right? So let's get started on Chapter 5. And so Chapter 5 really goes into our cells, and it has to deal with the cell theory. And so here's some interesting things that you have between 50 and 70 billion cells a day that die. You're made up of 3 trillion, so I guess losing 50 to 70 billion is not a really big deal, but your body is now making new cells right away to replace those. Some cells will replace themselves faster. Can you think of any that have to be replaced really quickly? Skin cells are an example of a cell that has to be replaced pretty quickly. And then there are cells that are never replaced, or they are very slow to be replaced. Can you think of any examples of those? Nerve cells and brain cells, liver cells, lung cells. Some of these vital organs come to mind, and some of the problems with them that we have health issues associated with them is because of this exact fact, that they are never replaced or they're replaced slowly. So the beginning of this whole unit, or this whole chapter, is about cells and how do we replace them, and then how do we reproduce? So how do we replace ourselves? So of course, biology has in it the cell theory, which states that all living things are composed of cells, and that cells arise from pre-existing cells. Some organisms have just one cell, so that would be the protistans, and that would be the bacteria. But others, like you and I, are made up of trillions of cells. So cell division is the formation of new cells from pre-existing cells. And mitosis, the first process that we are going to study, is cell division that provides for growth and repair. So that's mitosis. And if you think of it, just its name, mitosis, what it's going to do is it's going to make exact copies. So a cell will basically clone itself. And so there's some information in here as well on cloning. What it is, how do we do it. But mitosis is cloning. And so when you're growing, you are just cloning one cell after another cell after another cell. Same with repair. And you can remember mitosis as being responsible for growth and repair if you think to a time when you stubbed your toe. I'm sure there's some time in your not too far past where you were maybe running barefoot and you stubbed your toe and you screamed around, you ran around screaming, "My toe, my toe, my toe." And now if I were to look at your toes, they probably look identical in that I can't tell which toe you actually stubbed, which toe was injured, because you have repaired that toe with this process called mitosis. So remember, mitosis is for growth and repair. Reproduction is the second part of our chapter, and reproduction is carried out by a process called meiosis. So if you think of me, I want to make a mini me, that's going to be for reproduction, and that's meiosis. So, but organisms can actually reproduce through mitosis, and that would be called asexual reproduction. So without having sex or without exchanging genetic information. Okay, so sexual reproduction, the one you might be more familiar with, and shame on you for being familiar with it, but sexual reproduction takes two parents. Two parents produce genetically unique offspring, and that's the whole point of sexual reproduction. It's not to make an exact copy of you, it's to hopefully mix up your genetic contributions so that way your offspring hopefully acquires the best traits from both parents. So in order to do that, you produce gametes. Gametes is the scientific term. It's generic. It just means your reproductive cells. And so if you're a woman, that would mean egg, and if you're a man, that would mean sperm. So those are your gametes, and they are formed in very specialized tissues, and those specialized tissues are called your gonads. So that would be your testes if you're a male, and your ovaries if you're female. And I'm sure you're familiar with the life cycle in sexual reproduction, that the male gamete or sperm cell fertilizes, it fuses with the female gamete cell called the egg cell. You produce a cell called a zygote. That cell has the full complement of genetic information, half from mom, half from dad. So it's called a zygote, and that zygote undergoes mitosis. So all of this from here on out is mitosis, mitosis, mitosis. So every body cell is an exact copy of this original zygote cell. And what makes your cells different from each other is based on which recipes in the DNA are they actually reading. So every cell is genetically identical. What makes your heart cell different from a skin cell is what recipes on the DNA that were contributed by mom and dad that are being read. That's what makes them different from each other. So asexual reproduction is reproduction where you only need one parent. It is cloning, and what happens is you produce a genetically identical offspring. This process looks exactly like mitosis because that's what it is. There is no sperm or eggs involved. The cells just copy their DNA, they make a complete copy of themselves and split themselves down the middle. So some organisms, like the sea star, they're capable of regenerating entire new arms in this case, because it's lost one of its arms or its rays. It's lost it, so it's going to regenerate it. And even that ray or that arm that was lost can regenerate the rest of the body. It's incredible how they've really are very successful at being able to reproduce using asexual means. What's also interesting about sea stars is they also can reproduce through sexual means. So, pretty fancy way of having a life, of being able to either go asexual or sexual. Plants are also capable of undergoing asexual reproduction because they'll produce runners. You can take clippings from plants. Cacti and succulents are very good at, if a leaf falls off, that leaf is capable of producing roots and then producing a whole new plant. Keeping in mind that in this process right here, there is no mix-up of genetic information. All of the offspring are genetically identical. There are some downfalls to that, and those downfalls come with the fact that your offspring are genetically identical to you, and so if you are susceptible to any disease, so are your offspring. But interesting as it is, asexual reproduction has been on this planet much longer than sexual reproduction. So there are some benefits to asexual reproduction, and some of those benefits include that you don't need to find a mate. A lot of energy gets spent on trying to find somebody who, is willing to copulate with you and raise your young or be part of that process. A lot of resources get put into being able to attract the correct mate. Just some really cool things. In my marine biology course, I was just showing them a video clip of some marine fish that in order for a male to attract a female, the male fish goes around and collects seashells and builds a bed of seashells for the females. And the females come by, and whoever's got the best bed of shells is the one that they'll mate with. That's a lot of energy. So there must be a huge payoff in sexual reproduction. Since sexual reproduction takes more energy, mixing up the genetic information must be a better payoff than asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction's benefits are that, hey, you can establish a population really quickly if you're not spending your time and energy trying to find a mate out there. So both of them have their benefits, both of them have their disadvantages as well. Okay, so if you just want to compare the two, just real generally, sexual reproduction requires two parents, where asexual, you're all alone. In sexual reproduction, there are gametes involved. Asexual, there are not. Sexual reproduction requires fertilization. Asexual does not. When we start looking at chromosomes, which is where we're going to move into, you will see that sexual reproduction involves two sets of chromosomes, where asexual reproduction only involves one. And then, of course, the offspring, sexual reproduction, they're unique, versus asexual reproduction, they are not. Okay, so I'm just about out of time. So I'm going to pick up right here when we come back on our next